Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt like you knew them? Really knew them? Long before they ever spoke your name? This is a story about that kind of knowing. It's about a man who lost everything and a woman who forgot who she was. It's about a child who never spoke until the one voice he'd waited for returned like a lullaby from a distant dream. But most of all, it's about second chances, not the loud, cinematic kind, the quiet ones, the kind you almost miss unless your heart is still listening. If you believe in the healing power of love, if you've ever held on to hope, even when the path disappeared beneath your feet, then this story was meant for you. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and linger in the soul, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. That way you won't miss any of the stories we tell here. Stories of resilience, grace, and the quiet beauty of being human. Now, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me tell you the story of a forgotten lullaby, a little boy's silent voice, and a family that found each other all over again. A struggling single dad saw a waitress kneel beside his son. Her kindness changed their lives forever. The diner was almost empty when Daniel Harper walked in, cradling his son against his shoulder like something fragile and sleeping. The bell over the door gave a half-hearted jingle, but no one looked up. The scent of bacon, coffee, and old vinyl booths mixed into the kind of comfort that only small-town diners at dawn could offer. "Anywhere you like," called a voice from behind the counter, muffled slightly by the hiss of a coffee machine. Daniel nodded politely and guided Ben to a corner booth farthest from the windows. The boy clung to his father's flannel shirt, his small fingers gripping the fabric with the silent desperation of a child who'd seen too many unfamiliar ceilings. Ben didn't speak, not with words. At 7 years old, he hadn't said more than a few syllables in his life. Daniel eased him into the booth, placed a well-worn toy car in front of him, and slid across to sit opposite. He scanned the menu out of habit, though he already knew what he'd order. 2 pancakes, one shared between them, and tap water. The budget was tighter than his belt these days. A young waitress appeared, notepad in hand. Her uniform was simple, a navy apron, white blouse, and her hair was pulled back into a messy braid that didn't quite hide the tired in her eyes. "Morning," she said softly. "Take your time. Kitchen's slow today." Daniel gave a small smile. "I think we're ready." She smiled back, scribbled down the order without a word, and turned to walk away, but paused when her eyes fell on Ben. The boy had begun rocking slightly, his eyes fixed on the table, breathing quickening. His fingers tapped a rhythm that only he understood. Daniel's spine straightened. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured, leaning across to calm him. But before he could reach, the waitress was already kneeling beside the booth. "Hi there," she said gently, her voice like wind through tall grass. "I've got a little brother who does that when he's nervous. Is this a new place for you?" Ben didn't respond, but his tapping slowed. He turned slightly, eyes flickering to her face. "I keep crayons in my apron," she continued, reaching slowly as if she were handling a wild bird. She placed 3 crayons and a small paper placemat with cartoon animals in front of him. "I think this guy needs a scarf, don't you?" Ben hesitated, then picked up the red crayon. Daniel's eyes widened. "He usually doesn't." He stopped. No point finishing the sentence. No point putting limits on the small miracles. The waitress smiled at the boy, then looked up at Daniel. "He's got beautiful eyes." "His mom had the same ones," Daniel said before he could stop himself. The waitress tilted her head. "She not around?" She... He paused, searching for the right word. "She passed 3 years ago. Fire." Something shifted in her expression. Barely perceptible. A flicker of emotion passed through her eyes like someone catching a scent from a dream. But then she blinked, nodded, and stood. "I'll get your pancakes," she said gently. "Take your time." Daniel watched her walk away, her braids swaying with each step. There was something about her voice, something oddly familiar, not in a literal way, but like an echo of a memory you can't place. He shook his head. Grief played tricks. It still did, even after all this time. Ben was coloring now quietly, his small fingers moving with unusual calm. Daniel leaned back in the booth and let out a breath. Maybe they'd make it through the morning without a meltdown. A few minutes later, she returned with a steaming plate and 2 forks. 1 pancake, cut in half just the way my mom used to do it, she said, placing it gently on the table. And here's a little syrup bear for the artist. Ben looked up at her again. This time he reached for the syrup bottle without hesitation. As she turned to go, he did something he hadn't done in weeks. He hummed. A soft, barely audible tune. No more than a few notes. Daniel froze. The tune, he recognized it. Not from TV, not from any therapy session. It was a lullaby. Her lullaby. The one Emily used to sing while rocking Ben to sleep on the old porch swing. It wasn't on record. It wasn't in any playlist. She made it up just for him. Daniel leaned forward, stunned. Ben, where did you hear that? The boy didn't answer, just kept humming, syrup dripping gently onto his plate. Daniel turned to look toward the counter. The waitress, Claire, according to the receipt tucked beside the napkin holder, was pouring coffee for an older man near the door. She moved with grace but not polish. There was something unfinished about her. He waited until she passed near their booth again. Claire, he said, that song, the one Ben just hummed. Do you know it? She blinked. I don't think so. Why? He only ever hums one song. His mom wrote it for him. She used to sing it every night. Claire stood still, one hand gripping the coffee pot. Her throat moved as if swallowing something heavy. I don't know where I heard it, she said finally, her voice quieter now. Sometimes I hear little melodies in my head. They come and go. Maybe I just made it up. Daniel stared at her. The words should have sounded casual, but they didn't. They felt like a puzzle piece trying to lock into place. Ben reached for his fork again. The moment passed, but something had begun. A shift, a thread pulled loose from the fabric of the ordinary, and Daniel couldn't help but wonder. Was this woman with the gentle voice and the memory of a forgotten song just a kind stranger? Or was she something far more impossible? The next morning, Daniel Harper found himself back at the same diner, without really deciding to be. It was like his truck had turned itself onto Main Street, slowing at the crosswalk, easing into the same faded parking space, outside the weathered sign that read Maggie's Cafe, home of the Hearty Heart. Ben sat beside him again, quiet as always, holding his toy car with two hands, like it might float away if he let go. The boy's eyes scanned the sky through the window. He liked clouds, Daniel had learned. They didn't talk too much or expect anything from him. Daniel wasn't sure what he was doing here again. Maybe it was the calm, or maybe it was the song. The bell over the door jingled as they stepped inside. Same booths, same coffee aroma. And at the far end, the same woman, Claire, balancing a tray of dishes with surprising grace. She looked over her shoulder and caught his eye. She smiled. A small, surprised smile, like she hadn't expected to see him again so soon. You're back, she said as she approached, tying her apron a little tighter around her waist. That's either a good sign or you didn't eat enough yesterday. Daniel chuckled softly. Bit of both, I guess. Ben slid into the same booth as the day before. Daniel followed, placing the toy car carefully on the table. Claire leaned on her notepad. Same order. Sure, Daniel replied, then hesitated. Maybe coffee, too. Black, she scribbled. Coming right up. As she turned, he said, Claire, can I ask you something? She paused. Of course. That lullaby, yesterday, when Ben hummed it, you really don't know where you might have heard it. Claire tilted her head, her smile faltering just slightly. No, she said. I told you, I don't really remember much from before a few years ago. Daniel's brow furrowed. You mean you lost your memory? Claire nodded, a practiced motion like brushing off lint. Car accident, 3 years ago, or maybe 4. Honestly, I didn't even know my name at first. He blinked. You didn't? Hospital staff gave me Claire. It stuck. She smiled almost apologetically. There wasn't much to go on. No ID, no one came looking. Just a couple scars and a head full of noise. Daniel stared at her, his heart thudding just a beat too hard. 3 years ago. A fire. An accident. A missing past. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Claire must have sensed the shift in him because her smile turned thoughtful. Most folks find it a little strange. You can say it. I'm used to it. I don't think it's strange, he said quietly. I think it's Something else. She offered a grateful nod and walked back toward the counter. Daniel sat frozen for a long moment. The hum of the diner faded around him. Ben was coloring again, crayons already out of the small tin Claire had placed on the table without a word. Same routine. Same grace. What were the odds? A woman with no past, a voice that could quiet his son, and a lullaby no one else should know. He knew it sounded crazy, but grief could make crazy things seem possible. Or maybe it just stripped away your need for proof. When Claire returned with the food and coffee, Daniel watched her closely. Not intrusively, but with the kind of gaze you give a person who feels like a half-remembered dream. She set the plates down, then sat across from him without asking. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel gave a humorless laugh. "Maybe I have." Claire sipped from a chipped mug she'd brought for herself. "You're wondering if I'm her." He looked up, startled. "What?" "The mother of your boy. I saw it in your eyes yesterday." She held his gaze, calm and unflinching. "You're not the first to wonder something like that. When people hear about the memory thing, they start to fill in blanks." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. "I get it," she said, "and I don't blame you. But I'm probably not her, Daniel." The way she said his name, it rang in his ears like a name spoken in prayer. "I don't even remember being a mother, or being married. I have a scar on my temple and a few fading flashes of heat and sirens, but that's it." Her voice softened. "I want to remember, I do, but sometimes wanting doesn't make it so." Daniel looked down at his coffee. He felt ridiculous, hopeful, confused. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "It's just, you remind me of her, the way you spoke to Ben, the way he responded." Claire glanced at the boy. Ben was humming again, softly, his lips moving to an invisible rhythm. "I think he likes music," she said. "He does," Daniel murmured. "He just never sings. Not since Emily." Claire's eyes flickered. Emily. That was her name. There was a long silence. Then Claire stood. "Do you mind if I sit with him for a moment?" Daniel nodded. She slid into the booth beside Ben, careful not to crowd him. Slowly, softly, she began to hum, just like she had the day before. A gentle, circling melody, the one that had no words, only warmth. Ben turned toward her and pressed his small hand over hers. Daniel's breath caught. For the first time in 3 years, his son initiated touch. Voluntarily, freely, as if something in that song reached inside and unlocked a part of him long sealed away. Claire looked up at Daniel, her eyes wide with wonder. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, voice thick. "You did something good." Claire looked down at Ben again, her lips trembling slightly. "It's like he knows me." Daniel nodded, barely able to speak. "Maybe he does." Daniel sat in the cab of his truck that evening, the engine idling as the sun slipped behind the hills, bleeding gold across the windshield. Ben was asleep in the back seat, curled under a worn quilt that smelled faintly of pine and detergent. His fingers still clutched the red crayon from the diner. Daniel wasn't ready to go home. Not yet. The house was always quieter after a good day, somehow lonelier, like it missed the sound of laughter it used to know. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old flash drive, plugged it into the stereo. The truck filled with the soft hum of Emily's voice. She'd recorded the lullaby on a whim, months before the fire. "So he won't forget my voice," she joked, swatting his shoulder playfully. He'd laughed then. He hadn't laughed much since. Now her voice spilled out into the twilight. Light, soft, almost whispering. "Sleep, little bird, on a cotton sky. Mama will hold you till dreams pass by." Ben stirred in his sleep. Daniel watched him, heart heavy. He wondered, how could Claire have known that song? She said she didn't remember where it came from, but the notes she hummed were too precise, too real. It wasn't something you stumbled into by accident. The next morning he made a decision. He stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, combing his graying hair, shaving the rough edges off his jaw. When he dropped Ben off at school, he packed the flash drive in his coat pocket. He needed to ask her. Maggie's cafe was busy for a weekday, farmers fueling up after the early shift, retirees lingering over the local paper. Daniel walked in and scanned the room. Claire wasn't behind the counter. "She's out back," said the owner, a plump, cheerful woman with a knowing smile. "Break time." Daniel nodded his thanks and stepped outside, rounding the building to where the staff sometimes sat for air. Claire was there, perched on an overturned milk crate, hair pulled into a loose knot. She was humming. That song. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "Didn't expect to see you so soon." "I brought something," Daniel said, pulling the flash drive from his pocket. "I'd like you to hear it." Claire's brow furrowed, but she nodded. He handed her his phone, already paired with a small Bluetooth speaker. When the melody began, her smile vanished. She stiffened, eyes locked on the source of the sound. "Mama will hold you till dreams pass by." Her hands trembled. "I know this," she whispered. I I know this." Daniel watched her closely. "Claire, this isn't a song you'd hear on the radio. My wife wrote it. She never performed it, never shared it online. She sang it only to Ben." Claire looked at him, her voice barely audible. "Then how do I know it?" "That's what I'm trying to understand." Silence stretched between them. Around the corner, the diner clattered with breakfast plates and distant conversation, too far away to touch the moment between them. Claire looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I get flashes, not memories exactly, just sensations. A scent, a sound, a color, like something's brushing the edge of my mind." She paused. "When I saw your son, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. A kind of pull, like I was meant to kneel beside him, like I already knew what he needed." Daniel's throat tightened. "Maybe you did." Claire stood up, folding her arms as if to steady herself. "Do you really think I could be her?" Daniel didn't answer right away. "I want to say yes. God, I want to, but I also don't want to project my hope onto you. That's not fair." "I understand," she said quietly, "but you're not the only one with questions." She pulled a small notebook from her apron pocket. "I've been writing things down since the accident. Dreams, flashes, names I don't recognize." She flipped it open, held it out to him. On one of the pages, a child's name had been written and rewritten several times, as if testing its weight. Ben. Daniel stared at it, breath held. Claire was watching him. "I wrote that name before I met you, before I knew you had a son." Goosebumps lifted along his arms. There were other scribbles, a sketch of a porch swing, a pair of hands holding a child's, a fireplace, and on the bottom corner of the page, barely visible, a heart with the initials EH inside it. Daniel's chest tightened. "My wife's name was Emily Harper." Claire's knees buckled slightly. She sank back onto the crate, color draining from her face. "That's not a coincidence." "No," he said gently. "It's not." She looked at him, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "I think something's waking up." Daniel sat beside her. He didn't reach for her hand, not yet, but his voice was soft, steady. "Then maybe it's time we find out who you really are." Claire didn't go straight home after her shift ended. Instead, she walked, past the row of antique shops that lined the quiet main street, past the bookstore with the always closed open sign, past the old gas station where the pump numbers ticked slowly like an old man counting change. The air was crisp, September cool, and smelled faintly of wood smoke. Leaves danced along the sidewalk, whispering dry secrets as they tumbled past her boots. Her mind was still back behind the diner, still caught in Daniel's voice. The flash drive melody, the notebook pages she had shown him, pages that made her chest ache with both recognition and fear. She walked another few blocks until she reached her small, rented room above a sewing shop. It wasn't much, just a kitchenette, a bed, and a window that faced the hills, but it was quiet, and it was hers. She closed the door gently behind her and sat on the floor, back to the wall, notebook in hand. Flipping through the pages, she saw pieces of herself she didn't fully understand, sketches of things she had no memory of drawing, snatches of dreams that came and went like fog across glass. She turned to a blank page. The pen trembled in her fingers as she wrote a single word. Porch. Then another. Ashes. She squeezed her eyes shut. Images swirled in the darkness. Warmth, laughter, flickering lights. Then suddenly, heat. screaming, a child crying in the distance, and hands, her own hands burned, reaching for something she couldn't reach. She gasped and opened her eyes. Her chest rose and fell in short bursts. The pen had dropped to the floor. Her body remembered something her mind couldn't. She curled her legs to her chest and whispered aloud, "Who was I?" The next day, Daniel stood on the back porch of his house, coffee in hand, staring at the swing that had once held his world. It hadn't moved in years, not since the fire, not since her, but now. Now it moved in his dreams again. He remembered Emily sitting there, her hair pulled back, Ben asleep against her chest. She would hum that lullaby, barely louder than the breeze. He used to watch them from the doorway, not knowing he was witnessing the best moments of his life. The sound of small feet on wooden planks pulled him from memory. Ben padded onto the porch in his socks, holding Claire's notebook. Daniel frowned. "Where'd you get that, buddy?" Ben said nothing, just held it out. Daniel took it gently and opened the cover. Inside was a new sketch. Not like the others. This one was vivid, detailed, and hauntingly familiar. It was his house, before the fire. Same siding, same porch swing, same garden gnome that still leaned, decapitated, near the walkway. And in the drawing standing in the doorway was Emily, holding Ben. But here's what made Daniel's throat tighten. The perspective of the drawing was from the yard, as if the artist had been watching from outside, watching their life from a distance. He sat down heavily on the swing. How could she draw that unless she had been here, unless she had lived it? He glanced down at Ben, who had crawled up beside him, resting his head against Daniel's arm. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't have to. That afternoon, Claire stood outside the house before she could second-guess herself. Daniel had texted her earlier, "I think you should come over. There's something you need to see." She hadn't answered, but here she was. He met her at the door, silent for a long moment as their eyes met. Then he handed her the notebook. Claire flipped to the drawing she didn't remember making. As she took it in, her knees wobbled. "I drew this?" she whispered. "Yes." She stared harder. "I've seen this place before, in dreams, but I never knew it was real." Daniel motioned toward the porch. "Come, sit." They sat together on the swing, the wood creaking softly beneath them. Claire touched the armrest, fingers moving slowly over the grain. "I used to sit here," she said quietly. "Didn't I?" Daniel swallowed. "Every night, especially in the summer." Claire closed her eyes. "I remember a wind chime, metal, deep tones. It used to calm me when I couldn't sleep." Daniel's eyes welled. "It was my anniversary gift. I didn't hang it back up after." She opened her eyes slowly, tears lining the edges. "Daniel, I don't know how to explain any of this. I don't know why these images are in my head." He turned toward her. "Maybe we don't need to explain it yet. Maybe we just need to listen." "To what?" He gestured to the swing. "To this. To your hands. To whatever's pulling you back here." Claire looked at the yard, now bathed in late afternoon light. It wasn't familiar, not completely, but it wasn't foreign either. It felt like the echo of a dream half remembered, the kind that leaves you aching even after you wake. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," Daniel said. "But if there's a chance, any chance, that you're her, then I owe it to you, to Ben, to us, to follow the thread." Claire nodded slowly. "I want to know who I am," she said. "And if that leads me back to you, then maybe I was never really gone." Claire hesitated at the threshold of Daniel's house. The porch swing had been hard enough. The creaking wood, the faint scent of lilac she couldn't possibly have remembered, and yet somehow did. But this was a doorway, a line she wasn't sure she could cross. Daniel stood quietly beside her, not rushing, not urging, just present. Solid in the way only someone who had carried grief could be. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her stomach churned. "Yeah, I know." And somehow he did. She stepped inside. The air was still, filled with the scent of coffee and something faintly citrus, like laundry detergent warmed by sun. It was a lived-in smell, familiar, comforting, a house trying its best to stay a home. Ben sat cross-legged in the living room, surrounded by crayons and construction paper. He looked up as Claire entered. For a moment, the quiet boy just watched her, as if measuring something invisible. Then he picked up a blue crayon and began to draw. Claire's eyes swept across the room, walls painted in soft earth tones, shelves lined with books, and a few scattered toys. There was a basket of laundry half folded and a cracked ceramic mug with the words "World's Okayest Dad" printed crookedly across the front. And then she saw the fireplace. Above it, hung slightly off-center, was a framed photograph. She moved toward it slowly, her pulse quickening with every step. It was a family portrait, clearly old, a little faded. Daniel looked younger, his arm around a woman with long, dark hair and eyes that sparkled despite the washed-out tones. Between them sat a toddler boy with soft features and wide eyes. Claire stared at the woman, the curve of her cheek, the shape of her mouth, the faint dimple just to the left when she smiled. It was like looking into a mirror she wasn't ready for. Her knees buckled slightly, and she reached out to steady herself on the mantel. Daniel was beside her in a second. "Claire!" She shook her head, blinking rapidly. "That's me." Daniel exhaled slowly. "That's Emily." Claire looked at him, her face pale. "But it's me." Daniel didn't respond with words. He just placed his hand gently over hers. Claire turned back to the photo. "I've seen her in my dreams. I thought she was someone I made up, a symbol. But it was memory, wasn't it? I've been remembering myself." Ben toddled over, clutching his newest drawing. He handed it to Claire without a word. She took it carefully. It was a house, a red-roofed cottage with a big swing on the porch. In front of it were three stick figures, a man, a child, and a woman with long dark hair. He'd drawn her. Claire knelt, looking into the boy's eyes. "Is this me, sweetheart?" Ben didn't answer. He didn't need to. He reached out and touched her cheek. And for the first time since she'd woken up in that hospital bed 3 years ago, Claire felt whole, like something had locked into place deep inside her chest. She looked up at Daniel, tears in her eyes. "I was here. I was your wife. I was his mother." Daniel's expression was unreadable, a mix of hope and fear, joy and heartbreak. "I don't want to assume," he said softly. "Memory is complicated. Trauma is worse. You've been through more than anyone should." "Ada, but it's me," she said again, firmer now. "I remember the smell of this room. I remember the lullaby. I remember—" She turned and pointed toward the hallway. "There's a second bedroom, small. The walls are yellow. It has a mobile with stars above the crib." Daniel's eyes widened. "We painted it that color together. The mobile, it played that lullaby." "I remember it playing," Claire whispered. "I remember standing there one night crying because Ben wouldn't sleep and I felt like I was failing him. And you came in and you held me, right there by the window." A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. "Emily," he breathed. Claire nodded slowly. "Yes." They sat together later that evening, after Ben had fallen asleep on the couch beside them, curled into a blanket like a cat seeking warmth. The living room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. "I still don't know what happened after the fire," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just remember heat, pain, then nothing, until I woke up in that hospital with no name." Daniel nodded. "They told me no bodies were found, that it was possible you got out and ran. But after weeks with no sign, they declared—" He stopped, unable to finish. Claire reached for his hand. "I think maybe I didn't want to be found." Daniel looked at her, startled. "I mean, maybe part of me shut down so completely that I couldn't bear to come back. Maybe the pain was too much. Maybe losing everything at once fractured me." His thumb brushed the back of her hand. "Or maybe you survived something impossible and were given time to heal in the only way your mind knew how." She smiled gently. "Maybe." There was silence for a while, not uncomfortable, just full. Claire looked at the photo again. "She looks happy." Daniel nodded. "She was." Claire turned to him. "Do you think she could be again?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, the woman who'd been a ghost, a stranger, a memory. And now something more real than he'd dared to hope for. "I think," he said, "we're going to find out." The attic was quiet, heavy with the weight of dust and time. Daniel hadn't opened the hatch since the fire. It had survived, oddly enough, just high enough above the flames to escape the worst of the heat, just tucked away enough to be forgotten, like everything he wasn't ready to face. Claire, no, Emily, as she was beginning to remember herself, stood at the foot of the attic stairs, one hand on the wall for balance. She looked hesitant, as if the silence above her might shatter with the wrong step. "You sure about this?" Daniel asked from behind, flashlight in hand. She nodded. "If there's something up there that helps me understand who I was, I want to see it." They climbed together. The wood creaked beneath their feet as Daniel pushed open the low door. The attic was small and dim, filled with boxes and bins draped in old linens. Dust danced in the narrow shafts of light cutting through the vent slats. Emily moved slowly, fingers trailing along the edge of a box labeled "Winter Baby Clothes." Her breath caught as she lifted the lid. Inside were tiny onesies, wool hats, a pair of baby shoes with Ben embroidered on the soles. She picked one up, cradling it gently in her hands like it might crumble if she squeezed too hard. "I folded this," she murmured. "I remember the night. You were downstairs assembling the crib and cursing at the instruction manual." Daniel smiled. "It had 1,000 screws and no English." "I laughed so hard I cried," she whispered. "Then I folded all these while you muttered to yourself." She sank down to her knees beside the box, overcome by the unexpected rush of joy and grief tangled together. Daniel let her sit with it, let her remember. Then gently he moved to the far corner and opened a tin storage chest. Inside was a stack of letters bundled with faded ribbon. Some were addressed, most weren't. "Emily," he said softly, "you might want to see these." She joined him, brushing her fingers along the yellowed edges. The ink had faded in places, but the handwriting was hers. Loopy, slanted, unmistakable. She picked one envelope at random. There was no name on it, only a date, July 6th. She unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud. "Dear Ben, you're not born yet, and already I'm terrified I'll mess this up. You kick like you're training for the Olympics, and sometimes I cry just thinking about the first time I'll hear you cry, or laugh, or say, 'Mama?'" Her voice cracked. "If I forget to tell you one day, I need you to know this. I loved you before I ever saw your face. I loved you the moment the test said yes." She folded it slowly, hands trembling. Daniel sat beside her, watching with quiet reverence. Another letter, this one dated 6 months later. "Danny, I saw the way you looked at me last night when I broke down over the cereal commercial. You didn't roll your eyes or walk away. You just held me and said nothing. And that's why I married you." Emily laughed softly, a sound that felt like the first breath after surfacing. "I wrote these and never gave them to you." "Why not?" Daniel asked gently. She didn't answer at first, just stared at the pile. "I think I was scared," she finally said. "Scared of being too much, too emotional, too raw. I always wanted to look strong for you, even when I wasn't." Daniel's voice was thick. "I would have read every word." She reached for another letter. This one had a red dot in the corner, barely visible. The envelope was crumpled, the ink slightly smudged. "If something ever happens to me—" She stopped reading. Daniel stiffened beside her. She continued, slower this time. "Oh, I want you to know that I tried. I tried to be everything. For you. For Ben. But sometimes the shadows creep in when no one's looking. Sometimes I lose myself. If you're reading this, maybe something went wrong." Emily swallowed hard. "But don't let it break you. Don't become stone. Let yourself love again. Let Ben see light in you. Promise me that." She folded the letter in silence. Her hands rested in her lap, the paper trembling slightly between her fingers. Daniel exhaled. "I didn't know you were struggling. I didn't either. Not until after Ben was born. I hid it well. Smiled when people asked. But inside," she touched her chest, "I was scared I wasn't enough." "You were," Daniel said firmly. "You are." Emily looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since her return, there was something entirely steady in her gaze, a reclamation. "I wrote that letter thinking I might vanish," she whispered, "but I didn't. Not really." Daniel nodded. You came back. Maybe not the way we expected, but you're here. She looked down at the pile of unsent letters, messages trapped in time, pieces of a woman she was still rediscovering. And then, with care, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a pen. On the back of the most recent letter, she began to write, "Dear Ben, I'm back. Not all the way. Not yet. But I remember now why I fought so hard to be your mother. You were my light. You still are." Daniel read over her shoulder silently. "If I forget again, I want this in writing. I am yours, and I will find my way back, always." She signed it. Love, Mom. And when she looked up, her eyes met Daniel's. And this time, there was no fear, no doubt. Just a beginning. The hospital sat on the edge of town like an afterthought. 2 stories of pale brick and green trim, built decades ago and barely updated since. Emily hadn't been here since the accident, though she didn't remember arriving the first time. She stood in the parking lot, staring at the building, her heart knocking like a trapped bird against her ribs. Daniel parked beside her and stepped out slowly. "You don't have to go in," he said. "I do," she replied. "There are pieces of me in there. I need to gather them." Daniel didn't argue. He simply offered his hand. She took it. Inside, the lobby was as she vaguely remembered. Cool air, outdated chairs, and the faint scent of disinfectant. A woman at the front desk looked up from her computer and offered a warm but tired smile. "Can I help you?" Emily stepped forward, her voice a little unsteady. I was a patient here 3 years ago. I was admitted after an accident. I didn't have ID." The woman's brows lifted. "Oh, you're her. You're the one they called Jane Doe 17. Emily blinked. "Jane Doe 17? The woman smiled softly, like she wasn't sure whether to offer sympathy or congratulations. "It's what we call unidentified patients. You were in rough shape. Head trauma, burns. The paramedics said you were pulled from a car wreck off Route 12. Alone. Unconscious." Emily looked at Daniel. His jaw had tightened. "We were told she died in a house fire," he said. The receptionist frowned. There was no mention of a fire. Just a one-vehicle crash. No one came forward. No one claimed her. A nurse here named Gloria helped file paperwork so she could be placed in long-term care. Emily's hands were trembling. "Is she still here? Gloria?" "She retired last year, but I think she still volunteers on weekends. Let me check." After a few moments, the woman returned, smiling. "You're in luck. She's in the garden, reading to the kids." Hutterot, they found Gloria near the rehab wing, sitting under a willow tree with a copy of Charlotte's Web open in her lap. Her hair was gray and coiled into a soft bun, and her voice had the calm, sing-song tone of someone who'd lived many lives. When she saw Emily, she paused mid-sentence, lowering the book slowly. "My word," she breathed. "It's you." Emily knelt beside her. "You remember me?" "Of course I do." Gloria reached out and cupped her face with both hands. "You were like a ghost that never stopped haunting me. I always wondered what became of you. I was hoping you could tell me what happened after I was brought here." Gloria exhaled. "You were in a coma for 6 days. No name, no wallet, no fingerprints in any system. The police came, but with no missing persons report, you just slipped through the cracks. When you woke up, you didn't remember anything." "I didn't know who I was," Emily said, more to herself than to Gloria. "You looked so lost," the older woman said. "I sat with you every night for a week, just so you wouldn't wake up alone." "Do you remember what name they gave me?" Gloria smiled. "Claire, after my sister. You needed a name, and you seemed too delicate to be a Jane." Emily let out a quiet laugh, her eyes damp. "So I became Claire Bennett." "Yes," Gloria said. "You wore that name like it was made for you." Daniel stepped forward. Was there any reason to believe she came from a car crash, not a house fire?" Gloria hesitated. "That always puzzled me. The burns were light, mostly on her arms. Smoke inhalation, yes, but not consistent with a full structure fire. More like she was close to one, or ran from one." Emily's pulse quickened. "I ran." Daniel turned to her. "What do you mean?" "I don't know why, but I ran. I remember it now, the heat, the smoke. I couldn't breathe. I heard Ben crying, but something collapsed. I couldn't get to him. She looked down at her hands. So I ran. I think I was trying to find help. Gloria's voice softened. Maybe you collapsed behind the wheel and someone found you on the roadside. Someone saved her, Daniel said. Whoever it was, they didn't stick around, Gloria replied. The hospital said it was a good Samaritan. No name, no contact. Emily sat back on her heels, a strange mix of grief and awe settling over her. I've lived a different life for 3 years, but I've been running this whole time. Daniel took her hand again. You're not running anymore. Gloria squeezed Emily's shoulder. And it seems you found your way back to yourself. That's rare and precious. Emily nodded slowly. Thank you for giving me a name when I didn't have one. Gloria smiled. Sometimes people need a name to grow into before they remember their real one. Back in the truck, silence stretched between them. Daniel drove slowly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, hands tight on the wheel. Emily stared out the window, the autumn trees passing like pages of an old photo album. You okay? He asked. I think so, she said. It's strange, though. I spent 3 years building a life around a name that wasn't mine, but it never felt wrong. Claire saved me. Daniel nodded. Maybe Claire helped you survive, so Emily could come home. They drove a little farther in silence until the town came back into view. I want to know who saved me, she said. Someone found me, pulled me from that wreck, got me to the hospital. They changed the course of everything. Daniel glanced at her. Then we'll find them, together. She turned to him, her voice steady. I have to thank them. Whoever they are, they gave me a second chance. Daniel's voice was quiet. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it counts. The wind had shifted. Emily could feel it in her bones, something subtle but unmistakable, like the hush that falls before the first snow of the season. The leaves were starting to fall in earnest now, littering Daniel's porch in crisp layers of amber and rust. She sat on the swing where so many of her memories had first returned, cradling a mug of chamomile tea and watching Ben play with the leaves at the edge of the yard. Daniel stepped out a moment later, carrying a small photo album she hadn't seen before. I thought you might want this, he said, sitting beside her. She took the album with both hands, her fingers brushing over the leather cover. A faint floral embossing at the corner caught the light. She opened it slowly, breath held. Inside were photos she didn't know she remembered until she saw them. There was one of her and Daniel standing by the Christmas tree, him holding Ben and her wearing a Santa hat far too big for her head. Another, blurry and joyful, captured them dancing in the kitchen with Ben nestled between them, giggling. Her eyes lingered on each picture like they were fragile glass. I don't know how to describe it, she said. It's like I've lived 2 lives. One I'm only just now remembering, and one I've been trying to make sense of without knowing who I really was. Daniel nodded. They're both part of you. She looked at him. Does that scare you? He thought for a moment. Not anymore. Emily studied his face, lined with grief softened by time and tenderness. You're different too, she said. How so? You used to smile more easily, she said, touching the corner of his mouth. But now when you smile, it's earned. Daniel chuckled softly. You always said I smiled too much. I never meant it. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. Then Daniel turned toward her. Can I ask you something real? She nodded. Do you remember why you ran back into the house that night? Emily closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't on the porch. She was back in the fire, the roar of it, the sharp sting of smoke in her lungs, the heat pressing in from all sides. I thought Ben was still inside, she whispered. I heard something. I don't know if it was a cry or just the house breaking apart, but I ran. I didn't think. I just ran. Daniel swallowed hard. I couldn't find you, he said. 1 second you were in the front yard coughing, and the next, gone. I blacked out, she murmured. Maybe from the smoke. I don't remember the crash, just waking up in the hospital, and everything was gone. Daniel nodded. I've lived that night over and over, wondering what I missed, what I should have done differently. Emily looked down at her hands. We were both lost. And now? He asked gently. She met his eyes. Now, we're finding each other again. piece by piece. Ben approached then, holding a small cluster of leaves, carefully sorted by color. He handed them to Emily without a word. She took them, smiling. "Thank you, sweetheart." He climbed onto the swing beside her, snuggling under her arm. Daniel watched as his son, his quiet, cautious boy, rested his head against Emily's shoulder as though he'd always belonged there. And maybe deep down, he'd never doubted she would return. Emily looked down at him, then at Daniel. "He's teaching me how to be still," she said. Daniel nodded. "He does that." That evening, Daniel lit a fire in the hearth, not out of necessity, but for comfort. The house smelled of pine wood and something sweet. Emily had baked for the first time in 3 years. Banana bread, her old recipe. The scent wrapped around him like a memory you could touch. They sat together on the floor in front of the fireplace. Ben curled up nearby with a blanket and picture book. Shadows flickered across the walls as the fire danced. "I keep thinking," Emily said, "about what it means to come back from something like this." Daniel glanced over. "And it's not just about remembering who I was. It's about choosing who I want to be now." Claire wasn't just a name. They were years, real ones. I had a job, friends, even small rituals. I wasn't you or Ben, but I learned how to exist again. Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to erase any of it." She touched his hand. "I know, but I want you to know that I'm not the same woman you lost. I'll never be exactly her." "I'm not the same man you married either," he replied. "We've both walked through fire." She smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time we start again." His brows lifted. "A clean slate?" "No," she said. "Not clean. Whole. Flawed and scarred and complicated, but whole." Daniel laughed quietly. "You've always had a way with words." "I had 3 years to practice," she teased. They leaned into each other, the fire crackling softly between them. There were no declarations, no sweeping kisses, just presence, quiet trust, the beginnings of something new built on the ruins of something beautiful. From the corner, Ben hummed. That song, the lullaby. Emily turned her head slowly, watching him. He was humming with quiet contentment, eyes still on his book. Daniel looked at her. "He's doing it more often now. I think," Emily whispered, "he's beginning to believe I'm really here." "You are." She turned to him. "So are you." They stayed like that, firelight casting golden halos across their faces, while the night settled around them like a blanket. 2 lives lost, 2 souls found, and in the middle a boy who had always known the way home. The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window like warm honey, coating everything it touched in a soft golden hue. Emily stood by the counter, barefoot, whisking eggs in a chipped ceramic bowl. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic scrape of the whisk and the occasional rustle from the living room, where Ben was sprawled on the rug with his toy blocks. Daniel sat nearby, nursing his coffee, one eye on his son and the other on the woman who, just weeks ago, had been a stranger in a waitress's apron. Now she was barefoot in his kitchen, and the air felt full in a way it hadn't in years. "Did he sleep okay last night?" Emily asked, glancing over her shoulder. Daniel nodded. "Better than usual. I think having you around helps. Calms him." She smiled, soft and wistful. "It's strange. I don't remember how I used to be as a mother, but sometimes my body does. My hands know how to soothe him. My voice knows when to whisper and when to stay silent." Daniel stood, walked over, and gently touched her back. "You never stopped being his mom." She turned to face him. "Even when I forgot?" "Even then." She held his gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the stove, blinking away the sudden heat in her eyes. Later that afternoon, they all stood outside Ben's school, the Oak Ridge Learning Center, a small private school with a gentle focus on children with autism and sensory differences. The school had invited families for a fall family day, complete with a small musical performance by the children. Ben had never participated before, never sat still long enough, never tolerated the sound of instruments, the crowd, the fluorescent lights. But this year his teacher had gently suggested they attend. "He doesn't have to do anything," she'd said. "Just being here is enough." So they came. The cafeteria was decorated with paper leaves and construction paper turkeys. Parents sat in folding chairs, murmuring quietly, sipping from styrofoam cups. A makeshift stage had been set up with small wooden risers and a keyboard pushed to one side. Ben stood at the edge of the risers with a group of 7 other children. His fingers were in his pockets. His eyes were locked on the floor. Emily sat beside Daniel in the front row, her heart pounding. "Is he okay?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer right away. "I don't know." The teacher welcomed the parents, then nodded to the music therapist, a kind man with kind eyes, who sat at the keyboard and began to play a few simple notes. The children were meant to sing a short medley of fall songs. Nothing complex. The kind of thing you forget by next week. But when the first few notes began, something shifted. Emily sat up straighter, because the melody wasn't just a seasonal tune. It was familiar. No, it was hers. It was the lullaby. The music therapist had added it as an instrumental bridge between songs, unaware of the storm it would stir. Emily's eyes flew to Ben. He was still standing, head down. But then, his shoulders twitched, his lips parted. And then, in the middle of a too-bright cafeteria, surrounded by folding chairs and crinkled paper leaves, Ben sang. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear. "Sleep, little bird, on a cotton sky." The words fell from him like petals. Emily gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's coffee cup tumbled from his lap. Forgotten. Ben didn't look at anyone. He kept singing, voice trembling but true. "Mama will hold you till dreams pass by." The room had fallen silent. Even the parents who didn't know the song were still, watching something sacred unfold. Emily felt her body lift from the chair. She moved to the edge of the risers and stood there, not to stop him, but to be with him, to bear witness. Ben saw her, and for the first time in his life, their eyes locked and held. He took one step forward, singing the last line with barely a whisper. "Love will find you. Don't ask why." Silence, then applause, scattered, hesitant at first, then growing, though not loud. No one wanted to break the fragile beauty of what had just happened. Emily knelt down as Ben reached her. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He wrapped his arms around her neck and held on tightly. She pressed her face to his hair and sobbed. Daniel joined them, crouching beside them both, his hand on their son's back, his other around Emily's shoulder. A family finally unbroken. That night, after the dishes were done and Ben was asleep, tucked under blankets with his arms wrapped around his stuffed elephant, Daniel and Emily sat on the porch, the swing gently moving beneath them. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "He remembered the words." Daniel nodded. "From when he was a baby. From you." She exhaled slowly. "Music is memory." "Stronger than fire," he said. She looked over at him, eyes shining. "Stronger than forgetting?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, familiar object. A harmonica. She blinked. "You still have that?" "You gave it to me one Christmas. Said every man needed to know how to make music. I never learned, but I kept it." He handed it to her. She held it, fingers brushing the metal. Then she smiled. "I used to play lullabies on this," she said. "Badly." Daniel chuckled. "You were terrible." But Ben didn't mind. She lifted it to her lips and played a shaky note. Just one. It warbled in the cool air, fragile and imperfect. But it was enough. She lowered it and turned to Daniel. I think we're going to be okay." He reached for her hand. "I know we are." The diner looked the same. Same cracked vinyl booths, same clatter of plates in the kitchen, same jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. But to Emily, it felt different now. Not because the space had changed, but because she had. She stood just inside the door, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the window. Daniel was beside her, hand steady at the small of her back. Ben held her other hand, quietly tracing a pattern on her palm with his thumb. Maggie's Cafe had been a refuge, then a mystery, and now, a beginning. Behind the counter, the owner glanced up and froze, a dish towel in his hand, a look of stunned recognition on his face. Emily stepped forward slowly. "Hi, Walter." He blinked. "Claire?" Emily smiled gently. "Not anymore. My name is Emily Harper." He stared at her, jaw slack for a long moment. Then he set the towel down, rounded the counter, and pulled her into a hug so sudden it startled her. "I thought you were gone," he murmured. "I was," she said, "but you helped me come back." They sat together in a booth near the window. Daniel and Ben gave them space, slipping into a table nearby. Walter brought coffee, then sat across from her, hands folded tight around his cup. "I always wondered," he said quietly. "You disappeared so fast after the hospital discharged you. Just packed a bag one morning and left." "I didn't know who I was," Emily said, "and I didn't want to stay where I'd only ever been lost." He nodded. "I never pushed. You didn't owe me answers. I just hoped you found peace." "I did, eventually." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the kitchen filling the space between their words. Then she said, "Do you remember the night I came in?" "The first night?" He leaned back. "Vaguely. A paramedic dropped you off, said you needed a place to stay until the hospital figured things out. You looked like you'd been run over by a nightmare." She smiled. "That sounds about right. I offered the storage room upstairs. It wasn't much. You hardly spoke for the first 2 weeks." "I couldn't speak," she said. "My head was full of static. Everything was wrong, but I didn't know why." Walter's eyes softened. "You were a good worker. Kind. A little lost. But who wasn't?" "I've wanted to ask you something for a long time," she said, voice suddenly quieter. "That paramedic, the one who dropped me off, did you ever catch his name?" Walter rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't. He wasn't in uniform. Said he was off duty. Found you unconscious by the roadside. Said the hospital was closer than waiting for the ambulance. Never came back." Emily's eyes glazed with memory. "I remember a pair of hands, pulling me from the wreck. A voice saying, 'You're okay, I've got you.' That's all." "I thought maybe he was an angel," Walter said with a chuckle. "Maybe he was." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "A check," she said. "It's not a fortune, but it's something. You gave me a roof, food, a job, a name." Walter held up a hand. "I didn't do it for repayment." "I know," she said gently. "That's why it matters." He looked down at the envelope, then back up at her. "You're really her? The one from the fire?" She nodded. "Daniel's wife, Ben's mother." Walter leaned back, eyes shining. "You know, I always thought you had something inside you, something bright. I'm glad you found your way home." "So am I." From the corner of her eye, Emily saw Ben stand and walk over. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Walter without a word. Walter unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing, crayon on printer paper. 3 stick figures standing outside a house. A tall man with gray hair, a woman with a braid, and a child holding both their hands. Above it, in careful block letters, it said, "Thank you for saving my mom." Walter's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ben slipped back to Daniel's side. Walter stared at the drawing, then wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I didn't save her," he said softly. "You gave her a place to start again," Daniel replied from across the room. "That saved all of us." Later that night, as they drove home, Emily looked out the window quiet. The world was turning gold outside, trees lit by the last rays of autumn sun. "I was angry for a long time," she said. Daniel glanced at her. "At what?" "At myself. For forgetting. For surviving while you thought I was gone. For living a whole life with a different name while you and Ben were grieving." Daniel reached for her hand. "You didn't leave us, Emily. You lost your way. That's not the same." "I know that now," she said. "But forgiveness takes time, and it starts with myself." He nodded. "I'm proud of you. For going back. For facing all of it." She smiled. "You've always been the brave one." "I'm only brave because I knew you were somewhere worth waiting for." They drove the rest of the way in silence, the kind that felt full, not empty. At home, Ben was already nodding off in the back seat. Daniel carried him inside while Emily lingered on the porch, eyes drifting upward to the night sky. Stars blinked between the trees, small and stubborn. She closed her eyes and whispered into the cool evening air. "Thank you. For the fire that didn't take her. For the man who pulled her from it. for the stranger who gave her shelter, and for the boy who sang her home. The auditorium wasn't large, but it felt vast in the way only school halls could. Walls painted in soft pastels, folding chairs lined in slightly crooked rows, a piano off to the side that had long since lost its shine. The stage was only a few inches off the ground, dressed with paper snowflakes and glitter-glued stars. Emily stood near the entrance, her hands damp with nerves. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her lower back. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she said, voice steady despite the knot in her chest. She watched as Ben filed in with the rest of his classmates, each one shepherded gently by their teachers and aides. The children, each somewhere on the autism spectrum, wore paper crowns and small badges that read, "I am brave," in colorful letters. Ben's eyes searched the crowd until they landed on her. He gave a slight nod. It was enough. Tonight wasn't a performance. It wasn't a recital. It was called the Winter Voices Gathering, a celebration of sound in all its forms. Some children would sing, others would hum. Some would simply sway to the music. There were no expectations, only encouragement. When the music therapist invited anyone from the family to participate, Emily stood. She stepped onto the stage, every footfall both heavier and lighter than the last. The room hushed. She took her place beside the piano, her heart beating wildly, and looked out at the children, each one radiant in their own way. But it was Ben she saw clearest, sitting in the second row, legs swinging, holding Daniel's hand with white-knuckled focus. She took a breath and sang, "Sleep, little bird on a cotton sky, Mama will hold you till dreams pass by." Her voice wasn't polished. It trembled slightly, cracked in places, but it carried truth, memory, love. "Close your eyes, don't be afraid. I'll stay near till the night begins to fade." She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. She sang for one child only. And then, from the silence, a voice rose. Small, fragile, steady. "Mama will hold you." Ben, his voice. Emily's breath hitched mid-note. She turned. Ben had stood up. His face was calm, his lips forming the words he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He stepped forward, never breaking eye contact. "Till dreams pass by." Gasps whispered through the audience. Not of surprise, but of something deeper. Recognition. The quiet miracle of watching a child unlock. Emily knelt at the front of the stage as he approached. He climbed into her arms without hesitation, bearing his face into her shoulder. The room was silent. Then applause. Soft, respectful, emotional. No cheers. Just tears. Daniel stood slowly, overcome. The moment wasn't just for Ben. It was for all of them. A song lost. A song found. A boy who had carried love deep in silence, finally letting it out. Later, after the crowd had cleared and the chairs were being folded away, the music therapist approached. "I've never seen him like that," he said to Daniel and Emily. "That was extraordinary." "It was her," Daniel said simply. The therapist nodded. "It was both of you, and him. He chose that moment." Emily looked down at her son, who was now humming quietly as he traced stars on the paper program. "Music lives in him," she said. "Even when the words were locked away, the melody stayed." "That's how it works," the therapist said. "Sometimes a song is safer than speech. Sometimes it's the bridge." Back at home, Emily tucked Ben into bed with a gentleness that felt as natural as breathing. He clutched his stuffed elephant, looking up at her. "You stayed," he whispered. She froze. He had spoken, not sung. Spoken. She leaned in. "Yes, sweetheart, I stayed. I always will." He nodded once, then closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, steady and calm. Emily sat beside him, unable to look away. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wet. "He spoke." She nodded. "He's finding his voice." "You helped him. We helped each other." They stood in the darkened hallway after that, not needing to speak. For a long time, Emily had feared she was too fractured to be whole again, that her return had come too late to matter. But tonight, in the echo of her lullaby and the trembling notes of her son's song, something had mended. Not erased, not rewritten, but healed, in the way that only music and love and forgiveness can. The next morning, Emily stood by the porch swing, her eyes on the sky. The world had that crisp, pre-winter stillness, where sound traveled farther and breath curled like ribbon in the air. Daniel joined her with 2 mugs of coffee. "Do you realize," he said, "this is the first morning in 3 years we're not waiting for something to go wrong?" She looked at him. "I used to think I didn't deserve this, that coming back didn't make up for what I missed. And now I think love doesn't keep score. It just waits." Daniel handed her a small box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a silver pendant, engraved with music notes. Beneath them, a single word, home. She looked up at him, eyes brimming. "This is the melody that brought you back," he said, "and the word that always meant you." Emily leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you. I never stopped." They stood in the soft morning light, arms around each other, while inside their son dreamed in color again. And for the first time in a very long time, the house sang. The town's harvest festival arrived with its usual quiet cheer. A small gathering of neighbors in flannel shirts and wool scarves, booths lined with pumpkin pies and knitted mittens, and children racing with painted faces under the copper canopy of October trees. Emily stood beneath a canopy of maple branches, her fingers wrapped around a cup of spiced cider. The music of the local bluegrass trio drifted through the crisp air, accompanied by the gentle murmur of laughter, clinking mugs and distant bells from the children's games. Beside her, Daniel handed Ben a caramel apple and ruffled his hair. Ben grinned up at him, sticky and content. His world was still full of patterns and sounds most couldn't see, but now it was also full of light. Emily watched them with a heart that felt full in ways she'd never imagined possible. Not the old fullness of expectation, of the pressure to be perfect, but something quieter, deeper. The kind of fullness that only comes after being emptied and learning how to refill with care. "Hard to believe," Daniel said, stepping beside her. "What is?" she asked. "That this is real, that we're standing here, that he's talking, that you're here." She smiled, bumping her shoulder against his. "It's all real, even the hard parts." He nodded. "Especially the hard parts." Huh. They stood in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the townsfolk mill about the hay bales and scarecrows. "I've been thinking," Emily said, "about how people always talk about moving on." Daniel glanced at her, curious. "I don't think we ever really move on," she continued. "I think we just learn how to carry it. The grief, the love, the memories. We don't leave them behind. We bring them with us into something new." He took her hand, weaving his fingers between hers. "And sometimes we get a second chance to carry them differently." She looked at him, eyes soft. "That's what this is, isn't it? Not a return, a renewal." He nodded. "A new song." At the edge of the festival, a small stage had been set up. Nothing grand, just a microphone, a stool, and a speaker crackling gently. A volunteer announced that the next performer would be a local parent sharing an original lullaby. Emily's name was called. Daniel squeezed her hand. "You ready?" She nodded. For the first time, yes. She walked to the stage with even steps, heart pounding not from fear, but purpose. The crowd was modest but attentive. A few familiar faces, Walter from the cafe, Gloria from the hospital garden, neighbors who had once left casseroles on Daniel's porch when the fire had taken more than just walls. Emily took her seat on the stool and leaned toward the microphone. "This is a song I wrote many years ago," she said. "I sang it to my son when he was very small. Then I forgot it, forgot him even. But he remembered, and because of that, I found my way back." There was a hush across the small audience. She began to sing. "Sleep, little bird, on a cotton sky. Mama will hold you till dreams pass by." The melody filled the air like the scent of cinnamon and autumn leaves. Familiar now, beloved. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, Ben at his side, their eyes fixed on her. Not with awe, but with recognition. It was a moment of claiming, not performing, of healing, not impressing. And when she finished, there was no wild applause, just something better, something more honest. Tears, smiles, stillness, the quiet reverence of people who had felt something shift. That night back home, Emily sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a thick quilt, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. Ben had fallen asleep early, his caramel apple abandoned on the nightstand, his cheeks still sticky with joy. "You know," Daniel said, his voice low, "when I lost you, I didn't believe in miracles anymore." Emily looked up at him. "And now?" He smiled. "Now I think miracles are quieter than we think. Less thunder, more whisper." She nestled closer. "Like a lullaby." He nodded. "Exactly like that." The wind stirred the chimes overhead, low, gentle notes dancing across the eaves like echoes of the melody she'd just sung, the same chimes he hadn't rehung for 3 years. Until now. Emily closed her eyes. She thought about everything they had walked through. The fire, the silence, the forgetting. The ache of rebuilding. The fragile steps toward healing. None of it had been neat. None of it had been easy. But all of it had been real. And sometimes, she thought, real was better than perfect. Because real love came with scars and second chances. With broken notes and rediscovered melodies. With the kind of strength that didn't need to shout, because it had already endured the burning. She breathed in the scent of the pine trees just beyond the fence and whispered, "We're home, aren't we?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He kissed the top of her head and pulled her closer. And then he whispered back, "Yes, we always were." Years later, when Emily would be asked to speak at parenting groups or autism support circles, she never began with the fire. She began with the song. She would tell them how her son taught her to listen before he ever spoke, how love outlasted memory, and how sometimes the most beautiful chapters in life are the ones you never meant to write, but chose to live fully when given the chance. And somewhere in every room she sang in, someone would begin to hum along, quietly at first, then with conviction. Because love, after all, doesn't vanish. It only waits to be remembered. If this story touched your heart, even in the smallest way, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? And what part of this journey resonated with your life? Let's keep this space a place for kindness, hope, and human connection. So drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories coming. Stories that remind us we're never too far from a second chance or a fresh beginning. Thank you truly for spending this time with me. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and never stop believing in the quiet magic of love.